Ooh, gasps in the studio there. Of course, the Princess of Wales inflating a life jacket. Lots of smiles, bit of a mishap. She seems to be absolutely as popular as ever, and you can see there are lots of pictures of this incident with a life jacket on all the papers. Let's have a look at the coverage on the Daily Telegraph there. You can see laughing away. Never seems to put a foot wrong, but does that, a year after the death of the Queen, translate to popularity with the monarchy? Well, someone who has written on this is Dr. Ed Owens. He has a new book out called After Elizabeth. Can the monarchy save itself? Can it, Ed?
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me on. Yes, the monarchy can save itself. But as I seek to emphasise in this new book, it hasn't undergone any great sense of modernisation, really, in the last 30 years. It's been free-floating in that respect. And now I think the king has an opportunity to really grip the steering wheel and transform this institution, bringing it up to date and into the 21st century.
Now, when you say grip the steering wheel, you're talking about quite dramatic steps. One of the things you suggest is that he would, resign.
Abdicate.
But not
He'd go, that's it.
not before reinventing the institution.
Hmm?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because we have to think back to what abdication represented for the late Queen. It was anathema to her, partly because what happened in 1936 when her own father, George VI, took over Edward VIII following his abdication. So she was never going to abdicate. But when we look at European monarchies, what they tend to do is that, if you like, an aging monarch will hand over the reins to the next generation by abdicating at an appropriate time. Now, one of the things I emphasise in the book is that there's a great opportunity for King Charles to modernise this institution. We haven't seen it so far. The first year of his reign has been about stability, continuity, caution. I think there's a real opportunity here, and I think it's an opportunity that must be shared with William. I think this is a joint project that father and son have to lead, and that when the appropriate time comes, 10, 15 years from now, maybe even 20 years
What's
from
the most
that the reins be handed on.
Ed, what's the most important thing they need to do?
Okay, there's lots of things that I suggest in the book, and I set out a concrete plan for change, how it would come about politically, but also with the emphasis on public support, a discussion in the media. I think this institution needs to be more democratic, more transparent, more accountable. One of the things that sort of crept into the reign of Elizabeth II was a lot of secrecy in terms of how the court engages with politicians, but also a lot of secrecy in terms of the family's archive. I think this institution needs demystifying. We think we know how it works, but we don't really. And I think in order to appeal to a younger generation who do care a lot more about accountability and transparency in public life, the king could set a really important example to other public figures, to politicians, by making this institution more transparent, by making it more accountable.
OK, all right. Thanks very much, Ed. Helena Kennedy, now, you are a convert, I understand it, because you started life as a Republican and then moved on to have an actual role in the coronation.
I did. It's very interesting because if you look at all the statistics, the young are the section of our communities that feel that why do we need royalty and why can't we have a president? And I was one of those people who, when I was in my 20s, felt that too.
But you grew out of it.
Well, let me tell you, if anybody cures you of the idea of presidency, you only have to look around the world, and certainly the United States hasn't inspired me thinking of Donald Trump. So I actually do think that as I became much more interested in how the Constitution works, I actually do think that there's a stability that's given by the continuum that there is by having a monarchy. But I agree with Ed, for example, about transparency and a much greater sense of how the whole thing works. And actually, I do think that there has to be a continued modernisation. But I do think that actually the King and Queen are pretty much on the button when it comes to this. I mean, the person that I was, who invited me to be part of her, group who were supporting her by carrying her regalia, was the Queen. I mean, I've known Queen Camilla for many years before she was ever even the Duchess of Cornwall, and I am engaged with her on lots of things to do with women and women's rights, and she's very interested in all of this. She's been very engaged with issues like domestic violence and speaking out about it. She has been she hosts a thing on International Women's Day, and she's a real modern woman, and I think that she actually is a great asset to the royal family. So it's about that, about more of that.
Ed is advocating abdication. So, I mean, has Queen Camilla been an asset to the royal family, Ed?
Oh, I would agree with Baroness Kennedy that in many respects she has engaged with issues in public life like domestic violence that were previously seen as taboo. And I think in that respect she's speaking out on topics that are of importance to the public. Is she an asset to the institution? Well, I think it's great that they were crowned together. And I think, this was an improbable victory earlier this year with the coronation of a king and queen who you never would have imagined being crowned back in the 1990s together. So I think that works quite well, and it's the fulfillment, if you like, of a story of true love as well. That plays quite well with the public. But when we look at the opinion polls, we can see that Queen Camilla isn't particularly popular, especially with the younger generations. We started by talking about Catherine, Prince of Wales. She is far and above the most popular member of the British royal family, closely followed by Prince William. And then we get to King Charles and finally Queen Camilla. And Queen Camilla's poll ratings are much more divided, around about 50% positive, 50% negative. And that's simply because of, if you like, the hangover of the 1990s, the War of the Waleses back then, what happened very publicly.
The numbers are pretty stark when you look at the divide on ages. Richard, this is an interesting one for the SNP, isn't it? Because the party tends to hedge its bets. Do you think an independent Scotland would keep the monarchy?
Certainly the SNP's policy to maintain the monarchy, and I think there's an argument there about continuity in terms of the social union that people speak about, that you're ending the union of the parliaments, but you're not ending the union of the crowns under that version of independence. And I think that would be valuable for a lot of people. I mean, I would kind of class myself as a pretty unenthusiastic Republican for many of the reasons that Baroness Kennedy is.
You'll find yourself taking part in a coronation. Well, I mean, you don't know.
Well, let's hope not. I think my invitation is probably forever lost in the post. I've filled my nest on that one. But it's simply about, what would you replace the institution with? But I think, to be honest, in terms of transparency and accountability, I take the arguments that are being made here, but I'm much more interested in the transparency and accountability, not of the ceremonial aspects of the Constitution, but the political side of the Constitution. And we've had a very, very recent example in Boris Johnson of what happens when you have a Prime Minister who is effectively out of control.
Yeah.
And I would far rather see energies being put into things like coming up with a written constitution, a Bill of Rights, codifying that and making it very, very clear what ministers can and cannot do, and having the Constitutional Court in place to keep ministers in check. I think that's a far more radical version of the reforms that we need. And I would love to look on from an independent Scotland and how the rest of the UK is getting on with that.
Well, I still miss Queen Elizabeth. It still hurts to think she's not there. But one of I think Ed's recommendation is very interesting. But what I really disagree with is the idea of thinning down the monarchy. And I think Princess Anne has made this point. Actually, we had Sophie visit Salisbury recently, and there is a role where the royal family need, in terms of opening hospitals, visiting charities, supporting charities, you need a critical number for them to be able to service the whole country. That's their roots in the communities is a big part of their support. And the Princess Anne has already made the point, a lot of them are getting older and actually do need a certain number of working royals to actually perform those public functions.
And do you think young voters can be won over, just finally?
What was wonderful was just to view the coronation through my young daughter's eyes, and they were learning about crowns and things like that, and thrones and the COVID. But I've got a long-standing girl crush on Camilla, the Princess of Wales, and increasingly so increasingly so on Queen Camilla. And that's because of their work on early years, on their work in fighting, and they passionately believe it, and they're using their platform for public good, but they will do long-term work that the political world doesn't often get an opportunity to do, and that's why I don't think the danger is there that Ed perhaps speaks to about the royal family.
OK, all right. Well, Dr. Ed Owens, thank you very much for joining us. Well, I'm sure that your book is being passed round at the palace. They're all looking at it with interest, I'm sure. That is all we have time for today, but I will be back tomorrow with more Politics Live. We're on at 12:15 because there's no PMQs tomorrow. Join us here on BBC Two and on the BBC iPlayer. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.